What's going on, CDL fans, and welcome back to the updated power rankings post week 3 of Major 1 qualifiers. We saw a bunch of pretty good upsets, honestly, in close matches throughout this past weekend. So let's update the power rankings based on everything that happened. And I will say, I've been seeing the feedback in the comments about the rankings. It's hard to balance because, I feel like half the time people tell me that I'm not reactionary enough, like I don't move teams enough. And then half the time people tell me that I move teams too much. So I'm still trying to find a balance that I feel like is fair and also, makes sense in terms of the actual rankings and for you guys watching. So definitely let me know what you think about the rankings this week. I tried to balance it even better. Let's get it started with the number 12 team, and it's, of course, the Vegas Falcons. I will say, though, for the Falcons, they did get one map win in each of their series this past weekend. So they're right now, they've gotten 4 map wins on the season. They got 2 in this past weekend. So at least it's looking a little bit better. Exited's been great, but they're still at 12. And coming in at number 11, down 3 spots, I do have Cloud9 New York. C9 played twice this weekend, and they lost 3-0 to LAG, giving LAG their first matchup, or their first win of the year. And then they also lost 3-2 to the Miami Heretics in a relatively close series in a couple of these maps, but losing to 2 teams, both of which were below them in the rankings previously, is honestly really, really bad for C9. And this team has a lot of things I think they need to work out, so I got them down at 11. Then we go to number 10, and I do have down 1 spot, the Vancouver Surge. I will say I feel a little bit bad moving Surge down because they only played 1 match this weekend and they did win it. But other teams moved up in the list after having a decent weekend, and the only win Surge got was against, of course, the Vegas Falcons. And honestly, not the most decisive series. I mean, only, a 35-point victory in the map 1. They lost map 2. Map 3 was decent. Map 4 was decent. But overall, man, I mean, I feel bad dropping Surge, but I would say they're probably one of the bottom 3-ish teams in terms of most people's rankings. Then coming in at number 9, up 2 spots, we got the Los Angeles Gorilla Mates. LAG did win 1 and lose 1 this weekend, winning 3-0 versus Cloud9, as we kind of talked about earlier, and then losing 3-1 to the Toronto Ultra, who, of course, is one of the top teams in the game. Moving them up 2 spots after a 1-1 weekend might seem a little bit crazy, but I think overall, when you kind of look at the season, LAG's had some closer maps and honestly not the worst map win rate for a team that was winless up until this past weekend. So I do have them up 2 spots. I think they're probably better than the Surge and even C9 being as they just 3-0'd them, but you can let me know what you think about LAG in the comments. Now we get into our top 8, and a number 8 up 1 spot. It is the Miami Heretics. Miami only played once this weekend. They beat Cloud9 New York, as we talked about earlier. Honestly, a series where they kind of almost had a red carpet here, Metals saving it with a +8. But they got it done in the SNDs, but despite their Search and Destroy looking awful and their Control being the best game mode, they flipped those, which just makes no sense. Miami, I would say, is one of those teams that's kind of just teetering between being in the bottom 3, but also maybe just breaking into the top 8. They're one of those weird teams that's hard to rank, but I mean, they're 2-3 in the Major 1 qualifiers, so could potentially still make winner's bracket. And then at number 7, this is a team that I think definitely I'm probably moved up a little bit too high after the minor bracket, and I have the Minnesota Rocker down 3 spots. As I said, I'm still trying to figure out the best way to do these rankings where it doesn't feel too reactionary, but also doesn't feel like teams are getting wins and they're not moving at all on the list, because if I did power rankings every week and no one moved around, it would be kind of boring. And Rocker, I do have down 3 spots, which feels a little bit tough, but they did lose 2 matches here to the Toronto Ultra in a Game 5. They got 6-0'd in Game 5 too, which is crazy. And then they lost 3-1 to Atlanta FaZe. And some of these maps here from FaZe, I mean, 3-0 in the Control, 250 to 170 in the and the Hardpoint, definitely pretty dominant. Honestly, Estrel had a great weekend, +5 versus FaZe, +20 versus the Toronto Ultra. The Rocker, I will say, is one of those tough teams to rate because they are 2-4 in Major 1 qualifiers. They went undefeated week 1, and then they've lost the last 4 straight in the quals, not including the minors. So they're one of those teams that I feel like could be in the top 6, but also when you look at who is in the top 6, I think having them at 7, honestly, is the perfect spot. Right, now we get into our top 6, and I'm going to be honest here. I feel like this is all pretty debatable. I feel like you could kind of mix and match here in a whole bunch of different ways. So you guys let me know maybe who your top 6 is in the comments, but at number 6, up 1 spot, I do have the Boston Breach. Boston played 1 match this weekend. They took down the Carolina Royal Ravens. Both of these teams now are 4-1 in Major 1 qualifiers, and they did it pretty handily. I mean, almost a 100-point club in the map 4, and just solid maps all around. Big maps at a Purge. We obviously saw he went 45-20 in the map 4. His teammates also putting in a lot of damage, so he was finishing a lot of kills, so I think credit to the whole team. But they looked really good against the Ravens team, who, a lot of people thought was a top 2, top 3 team in the game without a doubt. I had them at number 1 last week, so clearly I was a little bit faded, but Boston at number 6. You could probably put them higher, honestly, but I feel pretty good about them there. Then we move to number 5, and I have the LA Thieves still at number 5. Like I said, if you want to move Boston up over Thieves, because Thieves did lose once this weekend, I think that's fine. But LAT only lost one match this weekend. They only played one. They lost one, of course, being to OpTic Texas, who was one of the best teams in the game. Map 1 was an absolute stinker. I don't know what Scrap was doing. 6-19. He definitely just was getting caught with his gun down constantly. And then, of course, the 5-1 comeback out of OpTic Texas in the game 5. Absolutely heartbreaking. I don't even want to look at this anymore, man. I'm completely heartbroken watching this, but it is what it is. OpTic is obviously one of the best in the game. LAT, though, their only 2 losses this season are to FaZe and OpTic, who are, of course, 2 of the best. So maybe that's partially why I'm not dropping them down below number 5. I think they're still probably a top 5, top 4 team for many people. But down to number 5, honestly, 2 losses back-to-back. LAT, we got to regain, man. Show me something, please. We get to number 4, up 2 spots. I do have the Toronto Ultra. Ultra came away with 2 victories this weekend, putting them to 6-0 in the Major 1 qualifiers. So them versus OpTic, I believe, is the only match next week for both those teams, which will pretty much decide probably the number 1 seed at the Major, which is interesting. But they took care of LAG, not too bad, honestly. A big series out of Joe Deceives. And then they took care of the Minnesota Rocker. Again, this one went game 5, but 6-0 in the game 5. Good series all around, honestly, for them. Kleenex Beans doing their thing, Joe doing their thing. So overall, I mean, listen, Toronto, I think, is one of the best teams in the game. They're a team that you can never really sleep on. And they went 2-0, so they go up 2 spots. Now we get into our top 3. And at number 3, down 2 spots, I do have the Royal Ravens. The Ravens did only play once this week, but they lost 3-1 to Boston, as we talked about earlier. Big series from Purge and Snoopy. Gwyn, the only one to go positive. Slasher with a pretty rough one here, -24. I mean, Ravens were looked at as, I think, one of the best teams in the game. I had them number 1 last week, as I said. You lose to a Boston team who's, of course, I mean, they're no slouches. They're definitely a top 6 team, in my opinion. But definitely a loss that I think people predicted, but probably more often than not, people had Ravens winning this one. So that is going to drop them in the power rankings. And then we get into our top 2, and we'll put them both on here at the same time so you can see. I got OpTic up 1 spot to number 2, and I got FaZe up 1 spot to number 1. OpTic had themselves a great weekend, going 2-0, 3-1ing the Vegas Falcons. I mean, plus 35 out of HAVOK is insane. And then 3-2ing the LA Thieves, absolute ice in game 5, as we talked about earlier. Plus 28 out of HAVOK, plus 25 out of Shotzzy. HAVOK had like a 1.5 on the week. It was absolutely insane. This guy was a monster in this week of qualifiers for sure. So OpTic are looking good. Of course, like every team, there's things they need to work on. Their SMD is a bit hit or miss. But they had the ice in game 5. So clearly they have what it takes to get it done. And I have them at number 2. And then at number 1, I do have Atlanta FaZe, who only played once this weekend, 3-1 versus the Minnesota Rocker. Great series out of Celium, despite the troll in the Hacienda where he pulled out the RCXD instead of the Hellstorm towards the end of that map. So Rocker got the map victory. But for FaZe, I will say the reason I have them up at number 1 is when you look at, power rankings adjust weekly. And especially when you look at since after the break, right, when teams had a 3.5-week break, FaZe is, I think, 5-0 since the break. I believe they won 4 matches last weekend in the minors or 2 weekends ago, and then they won their 1 this weekend. So being 5-0 since the break, I think, is undoubtedly puts them as kind of like the number 1 power ranked team. I'd say the number 1 team in current form in the game. So, I mean, you let me know what you think about the rankings. What do you agree with or disagree with the most? I think it feels pretty good based on what we've seen so far. The bottom, like, I'd say, like, 8 through 11, you could probably mix and match, and I'd say, like, 6 through 1 or 6 through 3 could definitely be mix and match. But for me personally, I think FaZe and OpTic are definitely the 2 best in the game. So this is the power rankings after Major 1 qualifiers week 3. We'll update this again next Monday after the last weekend of the quals heading into Major 1. So if you enjoy the content, sub for more CDL stuff, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.